And so now it's a real pleasure to introduce Collin Mechler from Domo to talk about the fact that bespoke is cool again, how flexible data platforms are augmenting supply chain operations. Over to you, Collin. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello. I think I'm holding everybody up, right? From the end of the day. Did everybody go to the last session? Who was in the last session? It was good. The panel? Yeah. I think, so this is a more broad discussion around, I would call it solution development in supply chain in general. I think a lot of the themes that were discussed in the last panel, obviously being specific to procurement, there'll be some parallels to what we talk about here. And so maybe at the end, if you want to tie some things together, we can have a conversation about it. So my name is Collin Mechler. I run go-to-market and industry strategy at a company called Domo. Domo is a data platform, data and analytics platform. And, but honestly, the main reason I'm talking to y'all today is that my background, I'm a supply chain guy. I spent my entire career in supply chain, primarily in warehousing, transportation, and labor. And although I did spend a couple brief stints in merchandise planning and demand planning functions, but most of my background is more on the execution side of the house. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this notion of bespoke solution development. And if you are thinking bespoke is cool again, does that mean it was ever cool? I don't know if it was ever cool, but it certainly was the name of the game 10, 15 years ago. The only way to digitize supply chain operations was to literally build it from scratch because there wasn't a precedent prior to that, right? Then we'll go through a little bit of a history lesson where we went away from that. It's been in a bit of a dormant phase for the last probably 10, 15 years. And now it's back for the last few years for kind of other reasons, a bit of a different flair nowadays. And so to kind of set the stage, I'm going to start with a few quotes. I love quotes. I'm a big quote guy. I have in my iCloud, I have a notes folder filled with quotes. It could be like Oscar Wilde, could be Marcus Aurelius, it could be things my daughter said. It doesn't matter. Just if it's a good quote, it's in the file. And so these quotes I've collected are kind of North Star mindset, frames of mindset for thinking about what I do in y'all's space. And so if you're as sick and tired of hearing the term digital transformation as I am, I mean, I've been living in that space for certainly 10 years. I would say one of the more prominent examples of digital transformation in supply chain is a control tower concept. We've all heard of the term control tower, right? And similarly to digital transformations, there's a same level of kind of eye roll that it gets nowadays. And I think the main reason for that is that by and large, they haven't been that successful, right? That doesn't mean the idea was poor. I think the main reality is that the execution just needed some work. The ideas are definitely sound in both digital transformations, in control towers, et cetera, but we've had to think of more creative ways around the existing constraints in our organizations to be able to get value out of those initiatives. Another quote that I like, this one was told to me directly by the head of technology at UPS. He said it Bala said it pretty offhandedly. I don't think he thought anything of it, but for me it was a very profound quote, which is that the business is free to change their minds every week or month, but technology investments have to be for the long term, right? We want the business to change their mind. We want the business to be able to maintain a level of agility because, quite frankly, for most of us, that's the only way to survive, right? And hopefully grow. However, I cannot literally swap out technology every week or month. At best, we can, and frankly, technology as an industry, we've done a pretty good job of making it easier to swap things out, but you're still only going to swap out a blob of technology once a year, right? And I can't limit the business to being able to make decisions on a yearly basis or change or pivot, whatever, right? One good example of that sticks out that we're all super familiar with in supply chain was the pandemic. What I saw, especially living in the planning space, most demand planners that I talked with just gave up on their technology completely, right? It wasn't a question of looking at what their forecast said and then said, well, I don't think that's entirely right. I'm going to add a little bit more fudge factor to my replenishment plan. No, it was, I know this is just total garbage, so I'm going to throw it away completely and just go back to shooting from the hip, right? We want to avoid that next time. We don't want that to happen again, right? So another quote that I really like, this one's actually from last week, as a matter of fact. I spent time with the senior analyst in charge of AI technologies at Forrester, Rowan Curran, really good guy. And one of the things we were talking about was the space that I live in has a lot to do with data foundation, which, to be honest, if you're not in data engineering, data foundations, data architectures, it's not that sexy, right? I will never begrudge any of y'all thinking that it's not that interesting a space. However, it is very, very critical to the success of the things that live on top of it. And what he was observing, especially now that we've gotten a little bit of time, and there's a big parallel to what the discussion right before me was talking about, companies literally unequivocally, and I asked him, would you be on the record for this? And he said 100% of the time, the companies that have been successful in their special projects initiatives, specifically with respect to AI and Gen AI, and in that, all of them spent time doing it right, air quotes, by focusing on the data foundation, right? The ones who were not successful did not. And which is kind of interesting because as somebody who is, I feel like 10 years ago, supply chain suddenly got sexy. Well, now maybe, data foundations are cool, right? So now a little bit of a history lesson for what I've observed, at least over the course of my career in supply chain technology. And I wouldn't be a data nerd without some sort of graph, although this is a pretty lame graph. It's not very quantifiable. But on the y-axis is the kind of approximated level of technology used to solve operations problems. On the y-axis is time, right? And what we saw early on in supply chain and just operations in general, it was just about getting something that wasn't digitized. And we focused on financial transactions, right? That was the bread and butter, the ERP, the advent of the ERP, right? And that was literally building things from scratch where nothing existed previously. Then, as we got a certain level of foundation with our architectures, with our product usage, right? Then we as software vendors stopped focusing on building it from scratch, i.e. bespoke, right? Now we had a good, solid, vanilla SAP that I could sell you, right? And so then it became about building extensibility layers, right? Everybody's been given a sales pitch on extensibility layers, if you've been in this space for more than 10 years. And so that was about configurability was a big piece of this, and then scripting, right? We could come up with creative ways of scripting new functions into the application without actually literally having to build it from scratch, build it in COBOL or whatever. And now, thanks to DevOps, thanks to modern architectures, native SaaS, et cetera, elasticity, I have a level of flexibility in the way that I develop solutions that I really didn't have available to me previously. Likewise, at the same time, maybe because of, maybe contributing to, I don't know, it's kind of a chicken or egg, I guess, we're seeing more and more supply chain operations being seen as more than just a cost center, as a differentiated zone, right? And so people are wanting to actually codify what makes me special as a company into some sort of digital package, right? These two statistics will not surprise anybody in the room, but according to a study from Kepler, a survey, I should say, from Kepler Consulting, 90% of supply chain managers think that demand is fluctuating more than it was before. Big surprise. And then likewise, risk is increasing as well, right? Risk is the big one to me because I think we've all experienced what the extreme example of that looks like, and all of us are terrified to go back to those times again, right? And so there are certain things that we can do in a proactive manner, both architecturally as well as business process related, to help prevent that or at least minimize the damage when it happens. So business operations, more complex than they've ever been. I don't think that's up for debate, but maybe at the end we can talk about it if you disagree. One of the interesting nuggets that I've gotten out of my relationship with one of our customers, UPS, is I have a good personal relationship with a guy, Jeff McCorson. He is now retired, but he was the president of Global Freight Forwarding there, which is part of the supply chain solutions umbrella at UPS. His comment is that the problems in supply chain today are the same problems in supply chain 20 years ago. They have a slightly different flavor, right? The landscape has changed a little bit, but for the most part, we're still dealing with issues with blind spots and a lack of visibility. We still deal with silos, and we still deal with an inability to manage agility well. I think that the stakes have changed a little bit, right? While companies are using their supply chain as a competitive differentiator, that means that the pressure is higher on me as a supply chain manager or as a plant manager or as a head of supply chain to make sure that I do the same so that I can differentiate, right? This notion of the goalpost moving, I think, is really powerful to me because what was good last year is not good now, right? And we need to be able to manage that gap. However, there's an upside that exists that I don't think necessarily existed, say, I don't know, 10 years ago, which is that I now have an opportunity to move the market with my supply chain, right? Either through penetration, right? Maybe better profitability, so I'm increasing shareholder value through more effective use of labor. Emissions and ESG is huge. What I love about supply chain and carbon footprint is that there is a direct connection between the two, and it's a win for everybody. Supply chains, I study system dynamics, and I consider supply chain to be the most complex type of system there is, maybe next to the human body, but supply chains are massively inefficient. They're painfully inefficient, right? So just a little incremental improvement in a supply chain can have a massive amount of positive impact down the road in things like carbon footprint, in other types of goals that I might have for my company. And then finally, market share, right? I think, especially with the line of D2C and e-commerce and merchandising and next day fulfillment, everything is this retail as a general umbrella is blurring. It's a weird space. You talk to analysts about how they define what retail is. It's very different than it was, say, 20 years ago, right? I think supply chain definitionally is the thing that fuels those companies. I mean, look at what Shein and Temu have done to Amazon and how they've been able to get plane loads that have been dirt cheap, that were cast off loads that DHL and UPS were selling for dirt, and then load their merch on those planes and on those containers from China to the United States for pennies compared to what their competitors were doing, for what Amazon was doing, and they've really been able to make a huge impact. So one thing that I like to do is, if we were to magically stack our operations right into one, I don't know, big rectangle, in the middle you would have your core business applications, right? That's the vast majority of what fuels my business, right? And that is serviced by my core business applications. Those aren't going away. SAP, Oracle. I used to implement SAP and Oracle when I was a consultant early in my career, and those aren't going away. I think now more than ever, though, there's the stuff on the wings that matters a lot more. Down at the bottom, I'm calling it other, very creative name, but really it's just new things, new exceptions that come up, right? Fire drills that pop up that I've got to deal with in an emergency sort of basis. Or maybe I've been doing a lot of my supply chain management in a very reactive way that I want to shift to more proactive, right, or predictive. And then on the top, this is my competitive differentiation, the thing that makes me super special, which is, quite frankly, so unique to me that I just can't put it in SAP, right? If we've ever tried to modify SAP, it's still, I mean, even in 2024, I love SAP. Like, I'm not trying to, it's the same with all of our core business applications. It takes an army of developers to make any changes to it, right? Maybe not the best business case to try to codify those operations into those systems. And so what ends up happening is you have a lot of workflows, a lot of business problems that just go unmanaged, right? And so I think one of the attributes that you can look for, think of the operations that are manual, paper-based, or maybe are managed by some Excel document that lives on somebody's desktop. All of those are examples of problems that I just couldn't put into my core business applications for whatever reason. Didn't want to. Literally, business case didn't make sense. This is something that the vendor told me was genuinely temporary and I wasn't going to have to worry about, but 5 years later, it's still happening, right? Whatever it is, right? One way that I like to think about trying to solve that is through the use of data. So this is a study that we did, and we pulled our customer base. We have 2,700 customers, so it's pretty statistically significant. And we asked them about a lot of questions about how they do their job with data. But just generally speaking, 30% of them said, I have the data to be able to make decisions, right, do my job. That means that 70% don't, right? And one of the reasons for that, in my opinion, is data is a language. I think we overlook that oftentimes, just like French, German, Python, C#, whatever it is, it's a language. And as software vendors, we have kind of forced the business community to come learn our language in order to get value out of it, rather than vice versa. The good news is, thanks to how architecture has evolved, thanks to the way that we have been building just kind of collectively over the last couple decades, digital cultures, it's allowed us the ability now to meet the business community where they live, speaking their language instead of vice versa, right? The 70% that doesn't have data, this means therefore that they are making decisions, taking actions with some sort of limitation. It could be blind spots, it could be a lack of context up or downstream, right? Whatever that is, but there's some limiter that data could help be a solution for, right? And then, so the problem statement is, how do I get that 70% access to better data, right? And I think that that bespoke solution development is one of the ways to do that, is the argument that I'm trying to make. One of the provocative questions that I've heard in supply chain is it still planning versus execution? You know, you look at all the supply chain software vendors, you go to their website, you'll see planning is one tab and execution is the other. But time horizons are shrinking. I'm planning on much shorter timelines now, right? I don't just think of S&OP. S&OP used to be a 6-month thing, right? Now I do my sales and operations planning like weekly. That's wild. Likewise, I need to have much more up and downstream constraint awareness when I do manage my executions. If I am dealing with an issue in a warehouse during staging or put away, I got to know what my dock door or my yard is up to, which oftentimes lives in a completely different system, right? Or maybe my appointments at the warehouse, for example. I've talked about the COT software packages built around core business applications, maybe a little bit too rigid, or frankly, just might not be the right tool for the job, right? That's not a knock on them. It's just, I use a hammer for a different reason than I use a screwdriver, right? Likewise, the swivel chair effect is a term that UPS gave me, which is kind of the first thing we ended up doing with them was for vendor management in their freight forwarding business, where they had a lot of ocean freight, and their operators were just, things going over the ocean, it's hard to know what's going on, right? Especially when it's the Pacific. And so to solve a problem that would come up, operators were doing what they called the swivel chair dance, right? Where they'd go to 6 or 7 different places to be able to find information. Just bringing those into a single cohesive experience, that was value adding. I don't think it's that difficult to do, right, most of the time. I think the way in which we did it was very cool, which I'm partial to, of course, but that swivel chair effect just rules supply chain operations. Everyone has an issue with swivel chairing, right? All right, so the opportunity, just to summarize it, and then I'll kind of wrap up here and we can get into Q&A, right? I think we should make a bigger deal about having complementary technologies to solve supply chain problems beyond my core. Right? It's okay that we use different tools for different jobs, right? That's okay. And it should be encouraged, frankly. So some attributes that I think are good to think about when I'm evaluating, is this a good fit? Does this make sense? Think about time to value, right? When I'm building a business case for a lot of these operational processes, I've got most of the big ones already instilled in my core applications, which means that a lot of these fringe use cases may be something that only happens weekly, monthly, right? The business case may not be super extreme, which means that I can't afford to invest 6 months into the development of a solution, right? Think of how long it takes to implement a WMS. I think it still is like a 6-month minimum timeline to implement a WMS if you're a Fortune 500, right? Likewise, I'm a big believer of real-time action and decision making, right? We as being an analytics company, I think one of the themes that I hear a lot within my own company is people use the term visibility a lot, and I don't really find visibility that helpful as a term, because it's missing an extra so what attached to it, right? Where what was ultimately, thanks to the visibility, what was the decision that I could make? What was the action that I could take that I couldn't previously, right? That's where we start to build a business case that's a lot more bulletproof. We're also seeing, a need to synergize and I guess collaborate a lot better between, I guess this hasn't ever gone away, but the need to collaborate between business and IT functions a lot more effectively. It's still really hard to get data out of IT. We still have long wait times to be able to do any development in IT. And fortunately, a lot of our modern technologies, especially those living in the cloud, are a lot easier to get data out of than they were previously. I don't have to put an agent or some sort of an engine living on a box in a warehouse somewhere like I used to. I mean, I still do for certain types of situations where I still have older software, but I don't have to as much anymore, right? And then the last piece that I'm really, really passionate in, especially after 2020 and 2021, is this notion of scenario modeling, what-if analysis, sensitivity analysis. When you're dealing with system dynamics, the number one thing that you can do is evaluate all the variables and determine which of those variables are most important, right? The way that I do that is by basically doing math and working through a number of scenarios and determining which variables move the needle the most. Supply chain is just a million variables, right? And on top of that, if I think about I've got, I don't know, after doing my analysis, I've got, let's say, 10 levers that I could pull to improve my supply chain for whatever reason. I probably only actually have the ability to pull 3, right? So you've got to make darn sure that the decision you make is accurate, right? And effective, and it's proactive. So that's why I'm a big proponent of building playbooks, for example, right? I'm a big proponent of building predictive analytics, right? To be a lot more proactive in the way that I can evaluate that a problem is happening. I can't predict the future and I can't prevent a problem from happening, but I sure, thanks to things that I do in advance, I can make sure that everyone's prepared accordingly from both an operational but also a technical perspective, okay? So I don't know if you want to call it a force multiplier. That's probably a more salesy way to put it, but I don't know. Gap filler, right? What's a good way to frame? I do think that there's a lot of white space and a lot of room for opportunity in the way that we complement supply chain operations using data solutions. So that's all I've got. Thank you guys very much for the time.
Thank you.
I'll take Q&A if you got it.
Any questions in the house for Collin before we call time? Really, really quickly, have you got a really good customer example of where this approach is actually paying off?
Yeah. I know I've talked about UPS. UPS I just love working with UPS for a lot of reasons. One, they have really hard problems. Two, the scale that they operate on is very broad. Three, they have a very, very, very robust IT department, shall we say, right? And so you have to be able to play nicely with them. We started with the vendor management side at UPS, but for example, they are trying to become more of a 4PL, especially on the supply chain solutions part of their business that's managing supply chain for other people, right? Where freight forwarding is part of. They're trying to be a much more 4PL technology forward, solution provider. And so they've got a solution called Symphony. You can look it up. And anyway, the analytics backbone for their solution is Domo, which is very cool because it uses a very heavy dose of real-time information, providing their customers, right, insight into what's happening with all of their shipment information, et cetera. I find that problem very, very hard and very, very interesting. And the solution for it is not as simple as being able to put it in some of your existing technologies. It requires a good experience that your customers' customers will appreciate and be able to use easily, right? And it's a very competitive space. 4PL is a really competitive space right now. Everyone's developing really cool assets. Yeah, that's probably a good example.
Cool. Thank you very much. Listen, we only have 20 minutes to go before the awards. But you are out there, apart from the awards. Are you around tomorrow? Domo is certainly around tomorrow.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any further conversation? Come and grab you.
Cool.
And
Thanks.
anyone watching online, grab you online.
Yeah.
Is that fair enough? Thank you. Thank you so much.